Hi, this is Comptroller Brooke Learman welcoming you to the Maryland Association of Counties Conduit Street Podcast, the show that discusses the issues and ideas shaping Maryland policy and politics today.
Hello, and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. This is Sarah from the MACO policy team here with an exciting episode. As you know, listeners, one of, if not the primary focus of the policy team work that we do here at MACO is maintaining strong and productive relationships with lawmakers of the great state of Maryland. And one of those very distinguished individuals is with us today. I am thrilled to bring to you today a conversation with the Honorable, the Distinguished, the Chair of the Judicial Proceedings Committee in the Maryland State Senate, Senator Will Smith. Welcome, Senator.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here with us today. And, we're in the interim and, we've got, session is a fast and furious 90 days, but, what's the vibe been like for you since session ended? Is it like a lot of family time or is it right back to work as usual? What do you get into?
Usually take a week or two off and then get right back to work. As you know, we're a citizen legislature, so we're in session for 90 days a year. Most of us have another gig, another job to keep us afloat. So I go back to my law firm and practice law when we're not in session. So I take about a week or two off and then right back into work.
Nice. Do you get any time for like vacations?
Yeah, we built in a couple of vacations, went to the beach, took a trip abroad. So yeah, get some time to relax with the family.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Do your kids play like summer sports and stuff or get ready for fall sports?
That's right. Well, I've got a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, so it's not a lot of sleep going on in the Smith household. But no, they both go to camp. The 6-year-old goes to camp, and she'll do some tennis, she'll do some soccer, and other things like that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Gets a taste of a couple different things.
Yeah, lacrosse. Trying to get her into lacrosse. So
nice. Well, what kind of spectator are you guys as parents? Are you like yelling at the ref, or are you like super quiet? What's your vibe?
No, it's funny. I have had to pull myself back because I'm usually pretty animated on the sideline, and I've suppressed my angst and my excitement all the time. So I really just chill now, but there's an inside of me wants to jump out there and cheer her on. So
and as they get older and get deeper into the sports, like that's probably going to ebb and flow. I bet you some of that intensity is going to come back out at some point.
That's exactly right.
Well, cool. Well, so yeah, let's go ahead and dive in. I guess for our audience members, I'll share that you have been on the Judicial Proceedings Committee since you came into the Senate. I want to say this is back in 2016. And so you've been a member of the committee, you've been the vice chair of the committee, and now you are the chair. So tell us a little bit about your role over the years in this committee and in this role.
Sure, you're absolutely right. I came into the Senate in 2016, and that was after then Senator Jamie Raskin ran and won for Congress, and I was in the House of Delegates before that. So I moved up to the Senate, and within a couple of years, I became vice chair to then Senator Bobby Zirkin, where again, helped manage the committee on the floor and kind of the day-to-day operations and make some of the bigger policy decisions. And then I became chair of the committee after I came back from Afghanistan, actually. So
wow.
You all may remember, we had a big generational shift in Annapolis around between 2019 and 2021. Speaker of the House, Mike Bush, passed away in 2019. And then Senate President Miller stepped down and then passed away shortly thereafter. So we had a huge change in leadership. I got deployed to Afghanistan that 2019 session, got back. When I landed, there was a new Senate president in Bill Ferguson.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Yeah, and Senator Bobby Zirkin announced that he was resigning and leaving the Senate. So I was next person up, and thankfully, and I'm glad that Senator Ferguson chose me to lead the committee, the oldest committee in the Maryland General Assembly, which is
wow, I didn't realize that.
Right.
Wow. So in JPR, so for audience members, we call it JPR for short. But so, it handles truthfully some really sensitive topics. But, on top of that, there's a lot to manage between some of the things you just mentioned, like committee members and stakeholders coming in to testify and leadership work groups, voting lists, and so on. I mean, it's a big job and it's such a tight period of time. Like, what do you sort of consider your primary focus and philosophy when it comes to leading the committee?
Well, I think first you got to understand just the general structure and flow of the two bodies, one, the House and the other, the Senate. So in the House, you have 6 standing committees and you have 21 members on the committees. In the Senate, you only have 4 standing committees and you have 11 members. So when you break up the subject matter, each Senate committee has approximately 25, a quarter more work, 25% more work, and half the personnel to deal with it. We also don't have the same rules of debate on the floor. So things on the floor at the Senate are much more wily or subject to debate. And you have more debate on the Senate floor. And I have experience in this because I've been in both houses. I've served in both houses. Mm-hmm. So the rules and the cadence of the Senate are just make things slower and the workload. So this session in particular, we had a record number of pieces of legislation entered in. So we had more bills than we've ever had in the history of the General Assembly entered this year. And so you've got all that has to be crunched into 90 days. And so I think understanding kind of the structure and the flow of work is important to understanding how the decisions we make are made. And so for me, you've got to prioritize, you've got to set the tone and an agenda up front early and prioritize things that fit into those columns of priority or those lines of effort. And then you funnel things through there. And then you try to obviously accommodate and meet your members' priorities and then the broader Senate's priorities. And obviously there are leadership priorities that come down from the Senate president and the 4 chairs. So it's kind of a winnowing down of work. Mm-hmm. I'll say one thing that I really do think that the number of pieces of legislation have really degraded the quality overall. And
that's so interesting. I wondered about that because Maryland is way up there in terms of how many bills we put up and put through every year.
That's right. I mean, I think if you have less pieces of legislation to consider, you can be more thoughtful and analytical in going into every piece of legislation, as opposed to having this kind of rapid cadence of trying to get things through, which in JPR, we really do slow things down. We don't put out as many bills as we used to, and that'll continue to slow down because the subject matter is so important.
Yeah,
you really can't make errors here, and they have real life impact on real Marylanders immediately. So we owe it to the citizens of Maryland to take our time and to really make thoughtful decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I found that early on when I, because I came from a different career, 2 years ago when I came to Mako, and one of my first, in my first session and my first committee hearing, when I was, sitting there waiting for my time to testify, it was the prosecutorial powers for the Attorney General's office when it comes
my
to
bill, yeah,
and that went on for almost 4 hours, and it was the very first one I was sitting there watching. And I was just like, wow, like that it was great. It was actually amazing to hear that conversation, but just the amount of time that it took, you really can start to see how thoughtful you have to be when it comes to some of the subject matter in JPR. But yeah, just how sensitive the topics are, but also hearing everyone and how a 4-hour hearing can change the dynamic of all the other things that need to be also heard.
That's right. And you're also managing relationships and politics. So every member wants their bill.
Yeah.
And, I think there are a couple things you got to step back and understand, does this bill address the problem? Does it address the Maryland problem? Does it actually fix it? And then, what are the secondary and tertiary consequences of your legislation? Because nothing happens in isolation. And I think too often those questions aren't asked, and that's it leads to problematic legislation. So we in JPR and the Judicial Proceedings Committee really try to take our time and understand, hey, do we need a piece of legislation to fix this problem? Can it be done?
Absolutely.
Can it be? Yeah, exactly right. Can it be done?
Yeah, that's something that I talk about in the interim and with the conversations that I have with different stakeholders is can we solve this outside of that process? And I feel like when we put more time into that, then we can make it so the system is less clogged by the time we do get into session. So I definitely hear that.
That's right.
Well, and one thing you mentioned is sort of, the changeover in political leadership when it comes to the speaker and the president of the Senate. But, there was another changeover recently. And it's interesting when you talk about sort of those outside impacts on sort of the legislative process, but this is sort of an outside and an internal one. When the administrations change over, I think the transition from Hogan to Moore was, I think, your first transition for a governor since you've been in the Senate. And so does that changeover affect the work of the committee in a substantial way?
Oh, it does. I mean, it's impacted the entire operation of the General Assembly.
Yeah.
So I was, I'm a Democrat. The prior administration was a Republican administration, 2 terms, 8 years. That was the only experience that I had. When we had Governor Moore come in, I will say that this is a much more collaborative environment. And I'm not trying to infuse politics into this. I'm just giving you the raw deal. Mm-hmm. This administration, they show up to committees, they submit testimony on bills and their priorities, and they weigh in and they collaborate. We sit around a table and go line by line for pieces of legislation. Never before this administration, before the Moore-Miller administration, have I seen cabinet level officials or administration officials come back and sit with us and sit with the stakeholders and go line by line to understand and negotiate and to haggle and work through legislation. It has been like night and day, and I'll tell you that it makes a big difference. I think that the whole switch of government has turned from something that's more stagnated to something that's visionary and progressive, and that has really moved our state forward in a way that I have not seen before. And again, I'm not putting politics into it. I'm just talking about the mechanics of the operation.
Reality.
Reality.
And one of the things that you had mentioned is sort of, needing to be thoughtful and take our time and consider these things substantially. And when you have all stakeholders that are willing and able to do that, that is certainly something that makes the product better in the end, because you've had all the stakeholders weigh in and the individuals that can affect the process and the outcomes share their perspectives rather than having, a smaller amount of people who are weighing in that do have something important to say about it.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Cool. Well, all right, so let's get into the 2024 session. It seems so far away now at this point, but give us a barometer. Sort of, was it 2024 an average level of busy? Was it really busy? Was it the craziest year it's ever been? How did it feel for you?
No, it was not the craziest year, but it was the most. It was the most voluminous in terms of legislation, and we had more bills assigned to JPR than ever before, and that means less time to go over line by line, more time in hearings, less time to go and vote on bills. So it was, in that sense, it was kind of surreal. I just never experienced anything like that. So it was a busy session.
Nice. Well, so when it comes to the work, the bills and the fiscal notes and the limited time, it's just a reality that some, let's say, bad bills and some good bills, depending on who you are, don't make it across the finish line every year because there's just not enough time. Especially when you're trying to do really thoughtful work and consider these things substantially. But so before we jump into some of the specific bills on my mind, was there something this past session in your portfolio or in someone else's that you thought was a good one that didn't get the attention it deserved and is worthy to make it through next session or at least get more consideration?
I thought we didn't spend enough, and I'm going to change this next session, but we didn't spend enough time on mental health and the intersections between mental health treatment, diagnosis, and the criminal justice system, and really wanted to spend more time on that because I think we've done a lot of great work over the years, and the Justice Reinvestment Act was part of that in terms of substance abuse and some mental health for nonviolent offenses. But we haven't dug farther in, and there's so much more work to do. And we are still using, to a large extent, a lot of our jails as treatment facilities, and we don't have enough beds. We don't have a fast enough administration of the proper diagnoses and treatment regimens. And I know that the Moore-Miller administration has really leaned in on this, and the Secretary Herrera has done that as well. But we are also in the Judicial Proceedings Committee going to take a really deep dive in that. So I thought that was something that was left undone and untouched to a large extent. And so we're gonna hit that full force next session.
That's great. And I think, when it comes to that mental health component, just, for individuals, justice involved individuals, but also general population, the numbers that we've seen in terms of mental and behavioral health challenges that people are having, the numbers are just soaring. And a system, I would say the system, whether it's, for just human services outside of a facility or healthcare services within, let's say, a detention center for justice involved individuals, I would say that they weren't exactly sufficient before we started to see this surge. And now we've got this surge. And so now we're trying to fix an even bigger problem with even the appropriate resources we would have needed for that smaller version of that problem. And that's a really tricky and I think scary place to be in. So I'm thrilled to hear that is going to be a focus, because I think that it's an issue that is getting worse for people, and people need help and they need services, and the more efficiencies that we can drive for that, I think that's great. That's absolutely something that Mako would support and get behind, is really how we can bolster those resources and sort of bolster the resources across the different silos within the local governments and the state government. I think that's one of the big things too, is everyone's doing good work in different pockets, but how we can leverage all that work to get an even greater benefit, I think it's certainly something that's been on my mind.
I think you use the word, the silos. That's the perfect descriptor, because and I want to give a little bit of a shout out or hat tip to Chief Justice Fader, Natasha Dartig, who's our public defender, but Chief Justice Fader, the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court in Maryland, and then also our Attorney General, for coming together. Chief Justice Fader really convened groups, the legislature and all branches of government, to kind of get together to address these issues, because there's a lot of opportunity for cross-pollination, but also these things happen in silos, and too often good things are happening, but not across jurisdictional lines. So,
or there's redundancies too, where they're covering the same thing when you could spread the resources further.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. All right, well, so getting to some of the work of the counties. So on your committee, you see a few Mako people here and there, probably me mostly, but every now and then I think Kevin or Dom or Michael will end up in there. So what is our vibe for our listeners? Are we coming in hot and blowing things up, or are we helpful? What do you feel like we contribute, good or bad, to the committee? And you can be totally honest.
Here we go. You unleashed me now, but no, you all are.
No, wait, I want the other sideline, Dad. No,
yeah. No, real talk though. You all have been really, really invaluable partners. Like I said, we are generalists in the General Assembly. We're here for 90 days. We have other jobs. You all are a tremendous resource for us. And like I said, when we're making these decisions, we don't want to do it in a vacuum. And so your perspective is valued. You all, the entire staff there is professional. And has always treated us with respect in terms of me and my office and the members of the committee. And so that's rare, right? So and you don't always get what you want, and you're still respectful, and that happens all the time in the Judicial Proceedings Committee and in the Maryland General Assembly, where people come in hot, they don't get everything they want, and the relationship degrades, and it doesn't lend itself to a positive policymaking process. You all have maintained that decorum and professionalism, and you guys are pretty fun too. So I like hanging out. Good.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that. I think for us, sometimes the distinction for outsiders isn't apparent when it comes to Mako in particular. I mean, but so like we're a nonpartisan nonprofit. We're representing the unified counties, and but it's different between other people who come and testify. Like, so we're not lobbyists. We don't contribute to campaigns. We're advocates working for a nonprofit, and we support the local governments. And I think one overarching thing that I hope the General Assembly feels, which is what you sort of just mentioned, is that we're a great resource. We can connect the General Assembly with realities across the state in terms of delivering basic services to shared constituents. And I think that's a benefit too. And I'm really glad to hear that you say that resource piece, because it doesn't have to be that we're always coming in to kill a bill or to support a bill. It can be that sometimes we can just send out some surveys and do some research and come back with a lot of really robust information that you guys can use as you're weighing in on different topics, because like we're always saying, that the jurisdictions are all very different and variable, and it's not that there aren't some overarching things that would make sense across the board statewide, but it's easier to make good policies when we know what the situation is statewide. And sometimes if you don't have a conduit, someone like us in between the locals and the state, that good information just doesn't get through. So I really appreciate you saying that, from the resource perspective, because that's what I want. I want more General Assembly members to tap into that piece of what we do, for sure.
No, it's absolutely right. And we use you all as a brain trust, so it's an important part of the process. So I really appreciate the collaboration.
And then before we dive into some of the Mako issues, I'm excited to speak with you about a lot of the things that are on our mind. But I know that you and Chair Clippinger worked very hard on juvenile crime and justice this year. And I mean, from what I recall, the work started well before session began. So can you tell us a little bit about how the lead up to session was on this issue and where it sort of began for you?
Sure. I mean, it came on the heels of a massive overhaul of our juvenile justice system in which there were a number of offenses that for obviously under the 10, 11 crowd could not be charged with, but then also raising that age up to 13 for a number of offenses and making some other just more resource allocations and procedural changes, technical changes that I think would streamline and help the juvenile justice system. And then we had really more of the Senate president expresses this well, articulates as well. It's called a crime perception problem, and that's not to minimize crime happening to people and victims of crime because it does happen, and there is too much crime in Maryland and in our 24 jurisdictions. So, but it is important to frame things properly and to understand that nationally and in Maryland, violent crime trends are down, and in Maryland, juveniles make up less than 10% of the violent crime.
Yeah.
And so there was definitely a skewed perception vice the reality. But the problems in terms of the functionality within DJS, within the police system, within the police departments, within corrections at large, there were broad systemic problems that needed to be addressed and needed more oversight, needed more resources, needed more retooling. And that's largely what the reform was about this year. What got the most attention were the offenses that slid back into what we call delinquency jurisdiction. And those offenses were very significant offenses, like offenses related to firearms, aggravated animal abuse, third-degree sex offense or third-degree rape. Those things are very significant. And those got slid back into delinquency jurisdiction. And that's what captured most of the attention and the press. But you didn't hear about this massive oversight board that we created that's going to consistently evaluate the juvenile justice system and provide recommendations, identify gaps in services, and continue to provide that information to the Department of Juvenile Services, to the General Assembly, to the governor. You didn't hear about the $111 million that got distributed to our public school system for mental health and substance abuse treatment for our students. You didn't hear about the governor's office, the creation of the governor's office of children, and the $42 million allocation there. You didn't hear about the $24 million allocation to the Department of Juvenile Services for programming and deterrence. And so,
which are the things that really prevent the problem from getting worse. Correct.
And that's exactly where we were going with the lion's share of the reforms. And what we did fantastic work that I think will have dividends for years to come, because it's about deterrence and about treatment and not necessarily about incarceration. We were not looking for carceral solutions, and that narrative got lost. And I thought the rhetoric got a little too hot, and the attention wasn't.
I agree, and I think that's unfortunate because, when people aren't able or willing to go below the fold and basically look at the numbers, look at what the other nuances that are associated with this that aren't just about incarceration or the justice system. I think it does a discredit to the argument, and it makes the whole thing get a little bit more political and just about being on different sides when it comes to the rhetoric that comes out of working on a bill like this. So, I can definitely agree that, sometimes the tension gets a little higher than it needs to, and the way that it gets communicated doesn't do justice to the work that's being done, but also the reality of the issue. And I think the perception problem, we saw that across the country. I mean, I actually was just writing a blog on the Mako Conduit Street blog yesterday about how many state legislators worked on juvenile justice issues, and it was 43 or 44 that took it up just this past year. And so, and that's one of those things where when you think about the numbers being down, I think that perception problem is something that a lot of different legislators are trying to deal with and tackle and still do good work, outside of the political optics of some of this stuff.
That's right. I mean, and the polls show it. I mean, the polls show that people are concerned most about crime, then the economy, then education. So I mean, these things, it's a political and perception problem. But as legislators, and I think as people in this space, we have an obligation to see through all of that and to make sound and wise decisions for the long term. So, which is not always easy.
Nope. No, we certainly understand that. Well, so is there anything, do you feel like it's something that needs to be continued, having work continued on it into the next session? Was there anything you feel like was missed on the juvenile justice stuff that you still want to look at?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, we have an opportunity, and I think a lot of the reforms that we put forward this session were done to ensure that we have accountability and transparency and then trust in the juvenile justice system.
Yeah.
And to my mind, that was the foundation for further reform. And that further reform, to me, for my personal priority, would be to curtail and to limit what we call direct file, which is youth charged as adults for a number of offenses.
Mm-hmm.
What happens in the Maryland system is that basically almost 85% of the children that are charged as adults get transferred down to juvenile court after a period of time. But in that pocket of time, it could be months if you're in the adult system and you're not getting treatment, you're not getting diagnosed, you're not getting the supports you need to get you out of that carceral cycle.
Yeah.
Also, a matter of judicial economy. It takes up a lot of time. Whereas if you go to the juvenile system, you're going to get those services, you're going to get those supports, and you're going to get a resolution within 90 days. So you're going to speed up the time frame, and you're going to have better long-term and short-term outcomes, and you're going to have better judicial economy. You're going to save our state money with better outcomes. Mm-hmm. So whether you're on the humanitarian, touchy-feely side, or whether you're on the fiscal, let's balance the books, make sense side, it makes perfect sense either way. So it's really a reform that I think is overdue, not for all offenses, but for what I've done is create a bill that would handle 85% of those cases. And I think a lot of work we did last session was foundational for what I hope we do in the next session or the next two sessions.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and that's something that, when you're talking about, putting them into the system that's actually going to get them the services they need, that is the long game, because that's basically the doing the work, and providing the services and following up on them and making sure that there's a positive long-term outcome. And that's what really moves the needle the most, I would say. And so but again, it's a long game thing. So sometimes in politics, it's like trying to, focus on that. I know you're trying to corral others around that idea that it's a slower process, but the benefits significantly outweigh the drawbacks of doing something that's more of like a short-term fix, or just a faster fix with, a more immediate solution, like potentially the ability to direct file. So, I'd say that's I think a viable strategy that's a long-term strategy that sometimes goes missed when people don't have that same long game perspective inside politics.
I think that's right. I mean, that's part of my just general philosophy for governing anyways, that you plant some of these seeds that don't bear immediate political fruit. And that is tough because you don't see those immediate impacts, and it's not politically popular at the time, and you get a lot of blowback, and it makes systemic change like that hard to do. Mm-hmm. But I think it's, again, if you're going to be a thoughtful person in this space for the right reasons, that's exactly the outlook that you have.
Absolutely. Well, all right. Well, so then, speaking of sort of, the carceral setting stuff, that's certainly one of the issues on Mako's mind. And honestly, when I come into JPR, it's a lot of public safety, mainly things that affect county governments and our workforces. But yeah, so detention center issues, law enforcement, traffic laws and enforcement are a big chunk of it as well. And I had a number of bills. I want to say it was 43 bills that I had in JPR this year. And I didn't sit at the table for all of them, but I appreciate you joining us today so that maybe for our audience, we can just go through some of those bills that were top of mind for Mako. You down with that?
I'm down. Let's do it.
Cool. All right. So first, let's go into an issue that has been on the radar for a handful of years, which is the police reform package from 2021. Mm-hmm. So one of the products of reform legislation was the police accountability boards, those administrative charging committees, and then the trial boards. And this was for allegations of police misconduct made by the public to the police accountability boards. And so this year you had co-sponsored, I think it was 3 bills, I want to say. I think it was Senate Bill 606, 607, and 608 that were sort of, I believe, tweaks to the PAB, Police Accountability Board procedures, and in some ways adding back elements that were missing in the process that I think left with the LEOBR, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. But can you tell us a little bit about the 3 things you were hoping to accomplish with those bills? Or even if it was 3 things, maybe it was 7.
Yeah, no, so I think, look, just understanding what the LEOBR was and what we put in place is it's an administrative disciplinary process. And then, those due process rights associated with that disciplinary process, all administrative. So it's not a criminal thing, although sometimes criminal activity can lead to this administrative piece. So just understanding that first, I think, but what we were trying to do with those, corrections was to ensure that first that things like, if you're out of uniform, those smaller infractions weren't taking up the process that was set up through our reforms in 2021 and wouldn't result in, an actual convening of a board or, an actual appeal process, but that could be resolved at the more quote unquote like local level within the department. And so because it's a resource allocation thing, it's not what the reform was intended to address. And B, some of these things cost $10,000, tens of thousands of dollars, and it's not a good use of taxpayer money and or law enforcement resources to go through that rigmarole for such a small thing. So and it just wasn't the intent of the reform. So that was more of a technical offense that made really good rational sense that we were trying to do.
And they can do that quickly, yeah, especially if it's just sort of a uniform violation.
Correct. Yeah, it's something you can just you can get it right there, you get it done, move on, and it's a better outcome for everything and cheaper and more streamlined.
Yeah.
So and then what were the other two? Remind me of the other two again.
There was six. Well, so I think you were just talking about the summary punishment one. I think there was also a tolling provisions one.
Oh, the year and a day, and so
Yeah.
right. So essentially, that was I think an oversight of us in 2021, but these investigations would have to conclude within a certain period of time, and sometimes that's just not viable. Sometimes it's just not something that can happen, and that's especially true if there is a criminal investigation that has to be resolved first,
Right?
Because obviously that takes precedent. So that's something again more mechanical and for functionality that had to be fixed and needs to be fixed. So we went ahead and tried to do that as well.
Well, so are these things that you are going to want to try to bring back up so we can get them implemented?
Yes, absolutely. Again, the reforms were meant for accountability, for bridge building between law enforcement and community, and for transparency. These three bills that we're talking about are really, to my mind, technical fixes that are going to improve upon the process and make sense for me. So definitely going to bring those back.
Well, and the tolling one, because I remember we didn't weigh in on this one because it's heavy procedure, and so we don't typically dive into those as much. But one thing I learned with the tolling, the year and a day one, is that if you have a criminal case going on, but then you also have an investigation happening for a separate case, that maybe one that went to the Police Accountability Board, the doing, and I'm not a lawyer, and you should correct me on anything that I don't get right here, but essentially, if you're doing concurrent investigations, information that you receive in one cannot cross over to the other. And so when you're doing them concurrently, the likelihood of a mistrial is higher because it's not a 14th Amendment violation, but it's essentially a violation. Is that it?
Yeah, I mean,
and the tricky thing there is that if you don't have that sort of tolling process in place where you're doing them consecutively rather than concurrently, the likelihood that you have a mistrial is higher, which is absolutely not in the interest of justice and accountability.
That's exactly right. And again, if you have an ongoing criminal investigation, you really want that resolved ahead of time for a multitude of different reasons, some which you just highlighted, before you proceed with the administrative process. So it just made good sense to get that done.
Yeah. And I feel like time frame wise too, I know sometimes when a big package goes through, it's one of those things where you don't want to tweak it right away. You really want to see what are some of the issues so we can tackle all of them at the same time. And so, I mean, I know just in working I'm the liaison for the county attorneys, and a lot of them, work directly with the PABs, and, the tolling one in particular and the summary punishment are ones that have come up over the last couple of years since they've been getting these systems established. So I think in our mind, it would be, some tweaks could be helpful at this point now that we've seen it play out a little bit. And we're not trying to tweak immediately when we don't know what the actual problems are. But these are definitely ones that I know have come up for the county attorneys pretty regularly. Yeah.
And we'll continue to pursue that. So that'll be on for next year.
Cool. All right. So next issue, home detention monitoring work group. So this at least for me popped up on my radar early in session. I didn't see much foreshadowing on this one, to be honest, but as I understand it, funding was running out to cover the cost of home detention monitoring for individuals accused of something, but out on pretrial release because they're not a risk to society or a flight risk. So there's no need for them to be detained. But as part of this program, the individual is tracked by a monitoring system, and Maryland has a program in place, and so do the local detention centers that make it so an individual doesn't have to pay the costs associated with their own surveillance. But the money to pay for, I think, the programs was running out, and we found this out, I want to say towards the beginning of session, and I think you and Senator Elfreth had co-sponsored legislation that would establish a work group on this. But I think you also had confirmed with the Administrative Office of the Courts that they could afford to fund the program, I want to say through the end of this year. I mean, from what I remember, you guys acted really quickly on this. And I mean, can you tell us a little bit about what sort of drew you to the issue and the work group?
Well, yeah, I mean, so it's a little bit different for the timeline. So what initially started the conversation was a lapse in time, and the mayor of Baltimore City had come in, I think for at least the last session and this session as well, saying, hey, look, we really do need to change this process for notification because there's a lapse in time. The way that the law is written gives the companies, and there are about 4 companies that operate these home detention monitoring systems in the state. And there's a lapse in time between someone when they break out of their geofenced location, or if they break into a place that's a red zone for them, meaning they're not supposed to go. If they have they have a peace order or something against them, they're not supposed to go a certain place.
Yeah.
The lapse in time for notification. And what happened, there was a high profile case in which someone broke through and committed a high profile crime. And then, the proper notification procedures didn't allow for enough time for law enforcement to respond adequately to prevent something bad from happening. And then when you drill down in the data, there were more of these kind of outside incidents than would leave any executive of a city or anyone in the general public to be comfortable with. And so what we had to do, so that's what started the whole conversation, saying, hey, look, we've got to really fix this. We've got to narrow the notification time. And so we drilled down with the companies and with the courts and with law enforcement to fix that problem. In the midst of all of that, I remember this like it was yesterday, I get a call from the chief judge of the district court and his chief of staff and the legislative liaison, and they come into JPR and they say, hey, look, we're running out of money because these companies have filed their invoices early, and there's no more money left, and we're gonna run out of money, within a couple of weeks. And when that happens, there will be several thousand individuals that will not be able to be monitored that are going to be out, that are going to be out in communities. And so when you hear that, the alarm bells go off. And so we worked with the budget and tax. We worked with our counterparts in the House, and we came up with a patchwork solution to get that done. But there's no long-term solution yet. We'll come back next year to do that. But they are able to cover themselves out of their own budget for the next year, and we're going to have to go ahead and in the next fiscal year and fix that. But it's a stopgap measure that fixed that. So we did that, and then we also created a work group to reevaluate, the notification and process and procedure. We did curtail that time to make it more truncated and more rapid, but there's still more work and oversight to be done. So we're going to continue to work on that as well, and that's the bill that Sarah Elfreth and I have passed.
Got it. Great. No, that sounds great. And I mean, for the local detention centers, we have pretrial release programs as well. And a lot of times the funding for covering the monitoring systems comes from grants. But we know, from my discussions with our wardens and our detention center directors is that the assurance of that grant funding isn't always there. And so I know that's something that they've experienced locally too, as far as making sure that they've got the funds to make sure that they can run these programs and the monitoring without that cost being transferred on to the individual who's being surveyed. But that oftentimes just compounds the financial issue for some of these individuals.
And it's really a great option. And our prison system and our jails population has declined consistently.
Yeah.
The last decade. And this is one of those elegant solutions when you can have people under monitoring in the communities where they can still be, parents to their children. They can still go to work, earn money, and keep their career prospects open. It's just a better solution for the right individual. So it's a great option that we want to see more of in Maryland.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for the local detention centers, they have sort of like a tiered sheet. It's like, four different levels of surveillance and just the process by which making sure that the individual gets assessed and falls into the right tier is really, really thorough. And yeah, you're right, because the more sort of flexibility an individual can be given, the less drastic impact it's going to have on sort of their personal life, their family life, their work life, things like that. And that's better for long-term outcomes that are positive.
That's right. I mean, the collateral consequences of incarceration are significant
Yeah.
and sometimes appropriate, but sometimes not. So
Mhm.
it's good.
Yeah. So, all right. So speaking then of detention centers, and I know our members, they can't stop hearing me talk about two major issues that have been compounding sort of the budget and the staffing issues in the local facilities. And those are healthcare needs, and also, mental health care needs, that we were sort of talking about earlier. And this is for incarcerated individuals. So to start with, I mean, I think you're pretty familiar with this because you and your staff have been incredibly generous with your time and hearing us out on this. But for our listeners, medication assisted treatment in the local detention centers is something that's required for all individuals with an opioid use disorder that are in the facilities. And these are good programs that they were mandated back in 2019 by statute. And they're meant to be funded by the state, but run in the local facilities. And so the issue that we've been faced with on this is that the state has not found a way yet to effectively fund the programs. And this is something that, we had the AG weigh in on. And they essentially came back and said that they're voluntary if the state's not paying for them. And our thing is that these are good programs. We want to keep running them. And from the county perspective, these are some of the most vulnerable individuals in the state. But like sort of if you combine, sort of put that next to the lack of revenue authority and other expensive, but I would also say meaningful mandates that we have on us, there's just not enough money to also cover the state's costs that they're required to pay. And so this past session, we had two bills looking to address this by requiring the state to fund it either out of the budget, which I know it's a really tricky budget landscape that we're in right now, but either from the budget or from the state's discretionary portion of the opioid settlement funds. And despite the effort, we were unsuccessful in getting either bill passed, but we did collaborate a lot with this, state agencies on this to keep the conversation open. But one of those bills was in your committee, and the other one was in budget and tax. But they're essentially doing the same thing, trying to get that state funding to come through. Do you have like a sense of where you think maybe these bills went wrong, or what strategies we need to be looking at to sort of resolve something like this? And I know it's tricky; it's not a one size fits all because we're in a tough budget situation.
No, we are in a very tough budget situation. Obviously the governor announced a $150 million
Yeah.
curtailment of the budget. So look, we're in a tough fiscal environment, and I think we're doing our best as government officials to be fiscally responsible. And I think that the budget that the governor put forward and the General Assembly approved and went and worked with, did just that. We, worked in earnest to try to get that money because there are very few instances in which you can see a direct nexus between a dollar spent and a life saved.
Yeah.
This is one of them. And, especially for Western Maryland, we have, Senator McKay and Senator Delaney James, Mary Delaney James, Senator James they were very, strong advocates for this money, and so was I. And so we weren't able to do it. The most readily identifiable source was the opioid restitution fund, which, as you can imagine, a lot of people wanted to tap into that for a multitude of different things. And so that became kind of a ripe pot to siphon from. I think it makes sense though for that fund, and we're still looking for elegant solutions to make sure that we get that money because, again, and I'll say this again, this is one of the very few instances when you can see the direct correlation between the dollar spent and the life saved.
Mhm.
This is one of them, and we do have to get that right. And there's a tremendous burden that we've placed on the locals that was not intended, and I think we need to fulfill our promise. And so we'll work in earnest to fix that and to address that. And so,
No, and that's good to hear. Yeah, and I think especially, but yeah, with the opioid restitution fund, I mean that's money that like medication assisted treatment is at the top of that list that the opioid restitution fund advisory council had said this is something the money should be used for. And so there, you're right. I think it makes sense. It's a practical solution in a tough budget situation. But you're right. Everyone sees those billion-dollar settlements coming in, but honestly, when that money all starts getting distributed, the number gets smaller and smaller as it goes down. And so, yeah, having a lot of very, very worthy problems to solve. It makes that money, I think, very attractive, but it also makes it go pretty quickly. I think, and from our perspective, since it's an issue that's been dragging on, it would be great to get it resolved, because as the frustration sort of rises with some of the local detention centers, it's, you don't want to start hearing about suits, because at the end of the day, suits are going to cost everybody more money, and that's the last thing that we really need in terms of actually trying to solve the problem and putting the money where it needs to go, which is the care of the individual.
That's exactly right. So.
Yeah. So another one to do with the detention centers, and similar theme, I guess, in terms of state compliance. But again, not an easy problem to solve. I don't think an obvious solution. And this was the one with the mental health transfer backlog in the local detention centers. And so just to set this up for audience members, so individuals in a local detention center who are found by a court to not be competent to stand trial, they must be transferred to a state hospital facility within 10 days of the court order. And we don't need to belabor this point, but the state hasn't been able to make the deadline, and this is sometimes by hundreds of days. And that backlog number has seen a jump recently, and it's over 200 that are waiting now. And the issue on the county end is that it's putting a major financial strain on the local facilities and significant stress on the staff when we're put in a position of caring for these individuals without the means or the training to provide them the services that they would be getting at a state hospital facility with more robust resources when it comes to dealing with individuals with severe and persistent mental illnesses. And my focus is on the county impact as part of my job, but the human impact is substantial for the individual who is suffering from a severe mental illness, and they're not getting the services they need and deserve. And so is this an issue that's sort of on your radar, you think could be viable to address coming up, or maybe it's not even a legislative solution, maybe it's regulatory, but what are your thoughts?
Well, no, so that's exactly, we talked a little bit about this earlier when we talked about Chief Justice Fader convening kind of trying to break down the different silos of government to address this problem. This is part of it. And in doing so, we studied this with what they've been deemed or called the Miami model. And so the city of Miami in Florida has done a fantastic job of channeling government resources, private sector resources, and working at the local level to make sure that they have the spaces and the beds available to treat folks, and also the proper supervision and training and trained individuals to make sure that folks are not only properly supervised, but then also properly treated. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of what I want to do in the Judicial Proceedings Committee next year is to have an at-length briefing, a day-long briefing on this very issue.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I mean, and the reason why I like to do that is A, it sets the tone for session, but B, it lends itself to a more lengthy discussion that you don't get necessarily in a bill hearing.
Absolutely.
There's no time. And so this will be a subject of discussion for our early session briefings next year. And I'm looking forward to having that continued dialogue, because this is an urgent matter, and it's something that I think we are capable of solving. And it'll have a tremendous impact. So I'm very excited to work on this, and we're going to start early next session.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not, and I will add to the state's efforts in this area, the assisted outpatient treatment bill that passed this past session is absolutely something that is a further upstream solution to make sure that these individuals do not end up in detention centers, because it's really not the best place for them. And so they have definitely, to credit to the state and to Maryland Department of Health and the administration is, we're talking with them regularly on this, and they're really trying to take steps in the direction that can help get these individuals the treatment that they need. And so, but yeah, it's one of those things where, yeah, it's becoming more urgent by the day. And like I sort of mentioned before on the MAT issue, when these types of compliance issues go into the legal system, it just makes the whole problem more expensive. Like for instance, I think Baltimore County, they had a judge that sanctioned MDH, I want to say $600,000 for their lack of compliance on the transfer window. And again, that's money. I remember someone brought up to me like, oh, that's going in the right direction in terms of accountability. And I'm like, not in terms of the money issue. Like that, this is going to just make the problem worse. And that's why. And so that's like, and I know Anne Arundel County has a judge as well that's sort of looking into these sanctions. And it's just, I just very badly on behalf of MACO do not want to go in that direction, because between the state and the locals, there's not a lot of money to go around, and that's just going to exacerbate the issue. So I'm glad to hear that, you see the urgency too, especially the briefing, because the briefings will make it so we can share a lot of really good, substantial information on the issue from all the perspectives that need to be involved, like MDH, the state's attorneys, the Office of the Public Defender. That's really happy to hear that here.
Yeah,
Cool.
right.
All right. Well, so, and last one, we don't even need to go too deeply into this. It's just really a big thank you for the committee, and your leadership on getting the MACO sheriff's liability bill through last session. It wasn't one of the top 4 MACO initiatives. It was more of a shadow initiative, but it's a really important problem to solve that had been causing tension between the county attorneys and the attorney general's office. And it was a good, efficient governance bill. So I think it fostered collaboration between the state and local governments, and everyone worked hard and fast before session so that by the time we got to you guys, we were not fighting over anything. So we really appreciate that the committee understood the importance of getting that bill through and helping us get that over the finish line.
Good deal. It's always good when people work problems out before they bring them to you. So that's
yeah, right.
happy to do it.
Cool. Well, all right. Well, so to sign off then, session hacks to end on a light note. So what are your go-to fast snacks? Like what's under your desk or in the drawers? And please tell us it's not 5-hour energies.
No. So it's weird. When I came back from Afghanistan, the energy drink of choice was this thing called Bang, which is totally not healthy and not good for you. So now the kick is everyone's on Celsius right now. So it's Celsius. Got some water. Always drink a ton of water during session, and probably protein bars are the go-to.
Nice,
so
yeah. Packs a big hit that you need. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. So that keeps you going. But drink a lot of water during session, and Celsius. You got to hit the Celsius because we work some water numbers.
Well, and what about so there's so much work gets done, in the buildings, but so much work gets done in restaurants and things and at different events. Are you one of those that's sort of you do both, or is it early to bed, early to rise, or are you late to bed, early to rise? Some people have gym every day at 5 a.m. That's intense. I can sort of see you being a gym 5 a.m. person.
So that you're right. You pegged me. I have to do it because it's a good stress reliever. It gets the cobwebs out, gets you going for the day, keeps you sharp. And then I come home every night. So I have 2 little children, and I don't get to see them but for the morning when I drive my daughter to school and when the 2-year-old wakes up. So we end at JPR, midnight, 11:30. So I get home around 1 o'clock on a late night, and then I'll get home maybe, usually 10 or 9 on a good night. And so I drive back every night. So it's a 32-mile drive. It takes at that time of night, it takes, a little more than 30 minutes. And I'm back and then up at it again. So 90 days, it takes a lot out of you.
It really does, right? Yeah, and especially we work hard during that time frame, but the schedule that you guys have to keep is significantly more intense than ours. So I try never to seem like I'm struggling with it, because I know you guys are in a completely different realm.
That all shows about halfway through session when people start getting tired,
Yeah, right.
So
well, and that's the thing, especially the intentions start to fly if people are tired, and so it's a unique environment. But well, and everyone has a chance to take their grace period in the interim. I was talking to Chair Clippinger, and he shared with us that he received an email to discuss next session just 9 hours, I think it was, after sine die. That's kind of aggressive, but how soon is too soon to start talking to you about next session?
Yeah, you got to give it at least a month away from walking away. I mean, you got to let people cool down and get back to regular life, because people are still simmering over what happened or what didn't happen in the last session. So you got to give it a month.
Yeah, well, it gives everyone a chance to see, sort of recalibrate and cool off, and get it, see a different perspective. Sometimes a little bit of space helps you look at it a little differently.
Absolutely right.
All right, well then, don't keep us in suspense. Will you be attending the MACO Summer Conference?
I will be there. Last year I had military duty and I missed it. So I'm still in the reserves and I had to be down in Dam Neck, Virginia. But this year I'm going to be in Ocean City, Maryland with you all. So it's going to be awesome.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. And we'll be so happy to have you. Honestly, having you guys there, to listen to, what some of the local governments are experiencing and the county professionals and some of the collaborations. I hope that it helps you guys sort of get get some of that resourced perspective that we hope that we can add. And also you guys elevate the conversation because you guys have just as much experience on some of the issues that we're delving into from a local perspective. And so that's certainly adds to what we're able to provide in that setting. So we really appreciate you making the time to get down there.
Yeah, but you're too kind saying that we elevate the discourse. That's good. But it's a great way to convene people, and it's always a lot of fun socially as well. And it's very educational. So looking forward to it.
Well, on that note, listeners, I'll remind you that you can still register to attend the Mako Summer Conference happening August 14 to 17 at the Roland Powell Convention Center in Ocean City, Maryland. Registration is open on the Mako website. Now, we certainly hope you enjoyed this podcast, and if you're looking for more like this, be sure to check out our catalog of episodes on the podcast platform of your choice. And while you're listening, don't forget to give us that 5-star review and share all the great county content with your friends and colleagues. Now, for Senator William Smith, I am Sarah Sample, signing off, and we will talk to you soon.